Arab executive Cries, seeing a poor African girl begging for his leftovers. Then he does the unthinkable. In the heart of Dubai's most luxurious business district, where billion-dollar deals are signed over gold-plated tables and exotic cars line the streets, something happened that no one could have predicted. At a five-star restaurant rooftop, surrounded by businessmen and elite guests, an Arab executive known for his cold demeanor and ruthless negotiations found himself face to face with something that shattered his world. As he sat with his colleagues, enjoying a lavish seafood platter and rare imported delicacies, a small, barefoot African girl climbed the steps to the rooftop. Her dress was torn, her face stained with dust, and her eyes carried a sadness that pierced through the noise of clinking glasses and shallow laughter. She didn't say a word. She simply pointed at the leftovers on his table with trembling hands. For the first time in years, the executive's throat tightened. Tears welled up in his eyes in front of everyone. What he did next left the entire restaurant in stunned silence and would forever change the girl's destiny. Before we dive into this emotional journey of compassion, transformation, and second chances, make sure to subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and turn on the notification bell. This way, you won't miss any of our powerful and inspiring stories that touch the heart and remind us of the humanity that connects us all. Omar Al-Fahad was a man feared and respected across Dubai. CEO of one of the largest investment firms in the Middle East, he was known for his sharp business sense and cold, analytical personality. His life was a continuous cycle of board meetings, luxury cars, and private jets. Compassion was something he believed belonged to charity foundations, not boardrooms. That afternoon, Omar sat on the rooftop terrace of one of Dubai's most exclusive restaurants. The city skyline stretched behind him like a painting of glass and steel. The air smelled of grilled lobster and saffron rice. His table was covered with untouched platters, grilled shrimp, lamb chops, imported cheeses, and a selection of desserts no one had even touched. His guests were laughing at some joke about market shares and profit margins. And then she appeared. At first, Omar didn't even notice her. The sound of laughter, the clatter of silverware, and the hum of conversation drowned out everything else. But the atmosphere shifted when the people at the next table fell silent. One by one, diners turned their heads. There she stood, a small African girl, no older than 7, barefoot on the marble floor. Her skin was dark and dry from the sun. Her dress, a faded piece of cloth, barely hanging on her thin frame. Dust covered her legs and arms. Her eyes were enormous, deep, and filled with something Omar couldn't name, something between hunger and resignation. She didn't speak. She just stood near Omar's table, staring at the half-eaten food. Slowly, her trembling hand pointed at the plate closest to her. The remains of grilled lamb with saffron rice. For a few long seconds, No one moved. The entire terrace froze. One of the waiters rushed toward her, already mouthing apologies to the elite guests. "Sir, I'll get rid of her immediately," he whispered, already reaching for her arm. "Stop," Omar said. His voice came out hoarse, cracking mid-word. Everyone stared at him. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. This was Omar al-Fahad, the man known for firing employees on the spot for being 5 minutes late. The man who once closed down an entire company for missing quarterly targets. And now, his eyes were glistening, his lips trembling. Omar stood up slowly, his heart pounding. The last time he had cried, he couldn't even remember. Maybe as a child, before life taught him to bury every emotion under layers of steel and discipline. Kneeling down, he looked into the girl's eyes. Her gaze didn't flinch. There was no hope there, just a dull acceptance, as if she had long stopped expecting kindness from strangers. "Are you hungry?" he asked softly. She nodded once, her throat visibly too dry to speak. Omar grabbed a fresh plate, scooped generous portions of lamb, rice, and bread, and handed it to her. The waiter stood frozen, unsure if he should intervene or step back. As the girl took the plate, her hands shook so badly that half the food almost spilled, but she clutched it to her chest, dropping to the floor right there on the restaurant patio and eating like she hadn't seen food in days. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she stuffed handfuls of rice into her mouth. Omar's colleagues exchanged awkward glances. One of them laughed nervously and said, "Omar, are you okay? It's just a street kid." But Omar didn't hear him. His heart was thudding too loud. Something inside him cracked wide open. For the first time in years, the wall he'd built around himself began to crumble. The more he watched her eat, the more he realized this wasn't just about food. This was about survival, about dignity, about everything he had taken for granted every single day of his life. And without another word, Omar reached for his phone and made a call that would set in motion a series of events no one at that table could have predicted. He wasn't going to let this girl disappear back into the streets. Not today, not ever. Omar couldn't stop staring at the girl. Even after she finished eating, sitting quietly with grains of rice stuck to her cheeks, her presence lingered in his mind like an unanswered question. The other guests returned to their conversations, awkwardly pretending the scene hadn't happened. Some made jokes under their breath. Others looked at Omar like he'd lost his mind. But Omar wasn't paying attention to any of them. His driver, Karim, stood nearby, confused. Omar waved him over. "Find out where she came from," Omar said, his voice low but firm. Karim blinked. "Sir, she's just a street kid. They're everywhere near the markets." "I didn't ask for your opinion," Omar replied, his eyes never leaving the girl. Karim nodded and crouched next to her. "Little one, where's your family? Where do you live?" The girl lowered her head. She mumbled something barely audible. Karim leaned closer, but couldn't catch the words. Omar stepped in. He knelt beside her again. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then whispered, "Amara." Her voice was soft, cracked, like she hadn't used it in days. The name stuck in Omar's mind like an echo. Amara. "And your parents?" he continued. She shook her head. Silent tears ran down her dusty cheeks. Omar stood. Without hesitation, he removed his tailored jacket, the one worth more than most people's monthly salary, and draped it over her small shoulders. Gasps erupted around the terrace. Some guests pulled out their phones, capturing photos and short videos. Omar didn't care. For the first time in his life, the eyes of strangers meant nothing. "Get the car," he told Karim. "Sir, are you sure?" Karim asked, visibly uncomfortable. "Yes, we're leaving, and she's coming with me." Minutes later, Omar, Amara, and Karim sat in the back of Omar's black Rolls-Royce Phantom, speeding through Dubai's wide boulevards. The air smelled of leather seats and expensive cologne, but Omar barely noticed. Amara sat beside him, silent and still, hugging his jacket like a shield. Her tiny body was lost inside the fabric. Karim, glancing at the rearview mirror, cleared his throat. "Sir, what's the plan?" Omar looked out the window. The city blurred past, a whirl of glass buildings and neon lights. "We're going home," Omar said simply. Home was a vast villa on the outskirts of the city, an architectural marvel with high ceilings, marble floors, and more rooms than Omar ever used. When they arrived, the house staff rushed outside, shocked to see their boss exiting the car with a barefoot child in his arms. "Prepare a guest room," Omar ordered, carrying Amara inside. The head maid, Fatima, a kind woman in her 50s, stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, should I call social services?" "No," Omar snapped too quickly. Then he softened his tone. "Not yet. Let me figure this out first." Fatima nodded and guided Amara to a guest bathroom. Omar stood outside the door, hearing the sound of water running and Fatima's gentle voice trying to coax Amara into taking a bath. Alone for the first time in hours, Omar sat on the staircase, burying his face in his hands. What was he doing? This wasn't him. This wasn't how he operated. He was a businessman, a strategist, a man who calculated risks and controlled outcomes. But here he was, bringing a homeless child into his home like it was the most natural thing in the world. The memories came flooding back, a childhood in Riyadh. Moments of hunger, sleeping on cold floors before his father's business finally took off. Feelings he had locked away for decades now clawed back to the surface. Maybe that's why Amara's eyes shook him so deeply. He saw himself in them. Later that night, as the villa settled into silence, Omar stood outside the guest room door. Through the small crack, he saw Amara curled up under the blankets, already fast asleep, his oversized jacket still clutched in her hands. For the first time in years, Omar smiled. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, questions would come. From the authorities, from the media, from his business partners. But none of that mattered now. He had made a decision, and there was no turning back. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Omar's villa, bathing the marble floors in golden light. The house, usually quiet and still at this hour, buzzed with unusual activity. Fatima was preparing breakfast, something simple but filling: scrambled eggs, warm bread, and fresh fruit. The staff moved cautiously, exchanging whispered questions. Omar stood on the balcony overlooking the garden, a cup of black coffee in his hand, but untouched. His mind was restless. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, Amara's face appeared. The hunger in her eyes, the fear in her body language, and now she was asleep in one of his guest rooms, like she belonged here. His phone buzzed. It was Youssef, his business partner and oldest friend. Omar hesitated, then answered, "Where were you yesterday? We had a meeting with the South African investors." Youssef's voice barked through the line. "I was busy," Omar said, staring at the horizon. "Busy? Omar, we're finalizing a multi-million-dollar deal. You can't go missing like this." Omar closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. "I'll explain later." Before Youssef could press further, Omar ended the call. Just then, Fatima appeared behind him. "Sir, she's awake." Omar nodded. He walked toward the guest room and opened the door slowly. Amara sat on the bed, her small feet dangling off the edge. She wore clean clothes. One of the staff had found an old t-shirt and sweatpants small enough to fit her. Her hair was still damp from last night's bath, and though she looked better, the fear hadn't left her eyes. Omar sat across from her, trying to soften his expression. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded shyly. Fatima brought in a tray of food, placing it gently on the nightstand. Amara's eyes widened at the sight of it, but she hesitated, glancing at Omar for permission. "Eat," he said softly, giving her a reassuring nod. She wasted no time, picking at the bread and fruit first. As she ate, Omar pulled up a chair. "Amara, do you know where your family is?" Her chewing slowed. She shook her head without looking up. "Do you remember how you got here? To Dubai?" Again, she shook her head. Omar's chest tightened. This wasn't going to be easy. Later that day, Omar made a few discreet phone calls. Private investigators, social workers he trusted. He didn't want Amara ending up in some overcrowded orphanage. He needed answers: where she came from, how she'd survived on the streets, and most importantly, how he could help her long term. But word spreads fast in Dubai. By late afternoon, his phone rang again. This time it wasn't Yusuf. It was a journalist. "Mr. Al-Fahad, we heard rumors about what happened at La Mer rooftop restaurant yesterday. A street child. You, feeding her, taking her home. Can we get a comment?" Omar froze. "Who gave you this number?" The reporter laughed nervously. "Let's just say, people are talking, social media too." Omar hung up immediately. Walking back into the living room, he found Amara curled up on the couch, watching a cartoon on the massive flat-screen TV. The remote control sat untouched beside her. Her face lit up when she noticed him standing there, but she said nothing. He sat down beside her, running a hand through his hair. This was escalating faster than he'd anticipated. Karim entered the room, holding a tablet. "Sir, it's already online. Someone filmed the moment at the restaurant. You, kneeling, giving her food. It's trending on local social media." Omar grabbed the tablet. There it was, a grainy video showing him, the usually ruthless CEO, on his knees, feeding a starving girl. The comments were pouring in, some praising him, others calling it a PR stunt. Omar set the tablet down. For the first time in his life, he realized his money, his power, his entire reputation, none of it could control what was happening now. But as he turned to look at Amara, still watching her cartoons, he felt something unexpected. Peace. For once, he didn't care what the world thought. All he cared about was her. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning of the storm. By the next morning, Omar's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News outlets from Dubai to London were trying to get exclusive interviews. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #kindness from the top and #CEO with a heart. Bloggers speculated about the mystery girl. Tabloids ran with headlines like "Cold-blooded executive shows his soft side" and "Billionaire's unexpected rescue shocks Dubai." Omar scrolled through the comments on his company's official social media page. Some were kind. "Finally, proof that rich people have hearts too." "I never liked Omar Al-Fahad, but today he earned my respect." But others were brutal. "Don't be fooled. This is 100% a PR stunt." Where was this kindness when he laid off 300 workers last year? And the worst, exploiting a poor girl for clicks and headlines. Disgusting. Omar tossed the phone onto the couch, frustrated. Just then, Yusuf stormed into the villa, not bothering to knock. His face was flushed, his voice sharp. "Omar, what the hell are you doing?" Omar raised an eyebrow. "Good morning to you too. This is not a joke. The investors are panicking. Our board is demanding an emergency meeting." "For what? Feeding a child?" Yusuf pointed at the TV, where footage of Omar and Amara at the restaurant played on a loop. This isn't about feeding a child. It's about you bringing an unknown girl into your home, making emotional decisions in public, and now the entire city's talking about it. They think you've gone soft, or worse, reckless. Omar stood. I don't care what they think. Yusef's eyes widened. You don't care? Since when? Since yesterday, Omar said, walking toward the stairs. Before Yusef could follow, Fatima appeared, looking nervous. Sir, there are 2 men at the gate. They say they're from Child Welfare Services. They want to speak with you. Omar's heart sank. This was the part he had feared. He quickly went to Amara's room. She sat on the floor, playing with a stuffed animal Fatima had given her. When she saw Omar, she smiled shyly. Stay here, he told her gently. I'll be right back. Downstairs, 2 government officials waited in the foyer. Both wore dark suits and held clipboards. Mr. Al-Fahad, the older one began, we've received multiple reports about a minor in your care. As you know, the law requires that any unaccompanied child found in the city must be taken to a government facility for processing and evaluation. Omar crossed his arms. She's not just any child. She's been through hell. She needs safety, not bureaucracy. With all due respect, sir, the younger official said, we have procedures for a reason. If you refuse to comply, we'll have no choice but to involve law enforcement. A silence filled the room. Yusef stood at the corner, shaking his head, mouthing, Don't fight this. But Omar's eyes narrowed. You're not taking her, he said, his voice low but steady. The older officer stepped forward. Sir, please. Unless you have a court order, Omar interrupted. She stays here. The officials exchanged glances. We'll be back with one, the older man said finally. Soon. They left without another word. Yusef sighed heavily. You just declared war on child welfare services. Do you realize what you've done? Omar didn't answer. He walked back upstairs. When he opened Amara's door, she ran to him and wrapped her small arms around his waist. He stood there, frozen for a moment, then slowly lowered himself to her level and hugged her back. For the first time in years, he felt human. But deep inside, he knew things were about to get a lot worse. The government was coming. His board was furious. His investors were losing patience. And yet, he had never been more certain of anything in his life. He wasn't letting Amara go. Not now. Not ever. 2 days later, Omar found himself sitting in a cold, echoing courtroom, a place he never imagined he'd be. Not like this. The room smelled of old wood and paper. Rows of benches lined with curious onlookers, journalists, and a few of his own board members who had shown up uninvited, hoping to witness the billionaire's public humiliation. At the front, seated behind a tall wooden bench, was Judge Lena Hariri, a stern woman with years of experience handling child welfare cases. She adjusted her glasses, and glanced over the papers in front of her before addressing the room. Mr. Al-Fahad, you stand here today accused of unlawfully harboring a minor and refusing to cooperate with child welfare services. Do you have legal representation? Omar stood, buttoning his dark-tailored suit. No, Your Honor. I'll represent myself. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Youssef, sitting a few rows behind, buried his face in his hands. This wasn't how Omar usually handled business. Normally, he'd hire the best lawyers in Dubai by now. But this was personal. Judge Hariri raised an eyebrow. Very well. Then please explain to this court why you believe it's in the best interest of the child to remain in your care. Omar took a deep breath. Every eye in the room was on him. I found Amara 2 days ago, he began, his voice steady but low. She was alone, starving, begging for leftover food in a public place. No shoes, no guardian, no one looking for her. I brought her home because I couldn't in good conscience leave her to the streets. The judge flipped through her file. You realize the law requires all found minors to go through proper government channels for protection and placement. I'm aware, Omar said. But with all due respect, Your Honor, I've seen how those facilities operate. Overcrowded, underfunded, emotionally damaging. I have the means to provide her with safety, education, therapy, anything she needs. I'm not asking for permanent custody today. I'm asking for time. A brief silence followed. The lawyer representing child welfare stood, a tall, thin man with a sharp voice. Your Honor, with all due respect, this is a dangerous precedent. Wealth doesn't make someone a qualified guardian. Mr. Al-Fahad is a businessman, not a caregiver. We can't let emotional impulses dictate the law. Omar's fists clenched, but he kept his tone calm. I've made a lifetime of decisions based on logic, risk, and calculation. This is the first decision I've made with my heart, and I'm prepared to take full responsibility for it. In the back of the courtroom, Fatima sat holding Amara on her lap. The girl clung to her tightly, her small hands gripping Fatima's shawl like it was her lifeline. When Judge Hariri glanced toward them, her expression softened for just a second. The child welfare lawyer pushed harder. We've arranged for immediate placement at a government shelter, equipped to handle cases like hers. Professionals will assess her mental and physical state. It's the safest option until we locate any surviving family members. Omar stepped forward. If family exists, he said, I'll help reunite her. But until then, let her stay with me. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Hariri tapped her pen against the desk, staring at Omar with unreadable eyes. Finally, she spoke. Mr. Al-Fahad, your reputation precedes you. You're known for being ruthless in business, not for acts of charity. But The law allows for emergency temporary custody in unique situations, pending further investigation. The room shifted as people leaned in, waiting for her decision. "I will grant you temporary guardianship for 7 days," she declared. "During this time, a child welfare officer will conduct daily evaluations at your home. A full investigation will follow. If I find any sign of negligence or danger, the child will be removed immediately." Omar let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The child welfare lawyer started to protest, but Judge Hariri silenced him with a wave. 7 days, she repeated. "Make them count." With a firm bang of the gavel, the hearing ended. Omar turned toward the back of the room. As soon as Amara saw him, she jumped from Fatima's lap and ran toward him. Without hesitation, he knelt and opened his arms, catching her mid-leap. The cameras flashed. The story of Dubai's coldest billionaire, now seen cradling a fragile little girl, would explode across every media outlet before sunset. But Omar didn't care. He carried Amara out of the courtroom, ignoring the reporters, the stares, and the whispered judgments. 7 days. 7 days to prove he was the right person to protect her. And he was ready for the fight of his life. The ride home from the courthouse was different this time. Omar sat beside Amara in the back seat of his Rolls-Royce, but instead of staring out the window lost in thought, he watched her. She clutched a small teddy bear Fatima had brought to court, her little fingers never letting go. Every bump in the road made her tighten her grip. As they pulled into the villa's driveway, a group of photographers waited behind the security gates, snapping photos even from a distance. Omar sighed, running a hand over his face. He'd spent years keeping his personal life away from the media. Now, his image was everywhere. When they walked inside, the staff stood at attention. Fatima was waiting with a warm meal already set on the dining table. "Let her eat first," Omar said quietly. Amara smiled as she sat down and began nibbling on pieces of bread and fruit. Her appetite was still small, but at least now she ate without fear someone would take the food away. Omar sat across from her, pouring himself a glass of water. As he watched her chew, he realized how much had changed in just a few days. Her face, once hollow and tired, now had traces of life. Her eyes were still guarded, but every now and then he caught a flicker of something new, trust. Later that evening, as Amara played with building blocks in the living room, Omar pulled Karim aside. "Any updates?" Omar asked. Karim nodded, lowering his voice. "We've checked missing child reports from the last 6 months. No match. No family reported a girl with her description missing from Dubai or nearby regions." Omar's stomach tightened. "What about immigration records?" "Still digging. But there's something else," Karim added hesitantly. The restaurant's security cameras picked up footage from earlier that day. Amara was seen wandering the streets alone, near the docks. "The docks?" Omar's eyes narrowed. "Yes, sir. We're checking with port authorities now. Omar nodded. Keep pushing. The next morning, the first welfare officer arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. Her name was Layla Hassan, a woman in her mid-30s with sharp eyes but a warm smile. She carried a leather notebook and wore a simple navy blue blazer. "Good morning, Mr. Al-Fahad," she said, walking into the villa. "I'll try to make these visits as smooth as possible for both of you." Omar led her to the living room, where Amara sat on the floor, surrounded by stuffed animals and coloring books. Layla crouched down, speaking gently. "Hello, Amara. Can I sit with you?" Amara hesitated but nodded. As Layla engaged her in light conversation, asking about her favorite colors and animals, Omar stood nearby, his arms crossed, watching every word, every gesture. After about 20 minutes, Layla stood up and approached him. "She's shy," Layla said, jotting down notes. "But she seems to feel safe here. That's good." Omar gave a small nod. "But I'll be honest with you, Mr. Al-Fahad," Layla continued. "The court will want more than just emotional observations. They'll want to see proof that you're emotionally prepared for this. They'll evaluate your lifestyle, your home environment, your commitment." "I'm ready," Omar said, meeting her gaze with conviction. Layla smiled faintly, closing her notebook. "We'll see." The rest of the day, Omar cleared his schedule. No meetings, no conference calls, just time with Amara. In the afternoon, he took her to the villa's garden. The sun was warm but not unbearable. Omar showed her the koi pond, the flower beds, and even let her run barefoot across the manicured lawn. At one point, she laughed, a soft, sudden sound that caught Omar completely off guard. It wasn't loud, but it was real. For the first time since he'd met her, she smiled without hesitation. That night, as he tucked her into bed, Amara reached out, grabbing his wrist before he could leave. "Stay," she whispered. Omar froze. The word was so small, but it carried weight. Without thinking, he sat on the edge of the bed, watching as she closed her eyes and drifted into sleep with a peaceful expression. For the first time in his life, Omar stayed awake long after midnight, not thinking about stock markets, mergers, or business empires. Instead, he thought about how to protect this one fragile life that had somehow become the most important thing in his world. And as the clock struck 2 a.m., he knew. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. A week later, Omar stood in front of Judge Hariri once again. The court was packed. Reporters, board members, and even strangers who had followed the story sat watching, waiting for the final verdict. Omar's heart pounded as the judge spoke. After reviewing all reports, observations, and considering the best interest of the child, temporary custody will be extended indefinitely, pending full adoption procedures. Gasps filled the room. Omar's eyes welled with tears. He turned to Amara, who sat holding Fatima's hand. When she saw him smile, she jumped off the bench and ran straight into his arms. For the first time, Omar didn't care about cameras, headlines, or business deals. All that mattered was her. As they walked out of the courtroom together, hand in hand, Omar knew this wasn't a rescue. This was the start of something permanent, a new family, a new life. And deep down, he promised himself, he'd never let her feel hungry, afraid, or alone again.